I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're three Black moms.
Go to church. You know, you don't need any therapy. You just need God. That's what we in our community have been telling each other for years, centuries even. Years of abuse, trauma, uh, sexual trauma, violent trauma, um, all kinds of trauma. Uh, we decide we don't need to talk to someone about it. We just need to talk to God. Today, we want to talk about therapy. Black people, we can use therapy. It's okay. And we need to talk about reducing that stigma of going to therapist and talking to someone and getting ourselves right. Because so many of us have lived for so many years with pain. And we tend to, instead of dealing with that pain in a healthy manner, we turn to substances, we turn to violence. Sometimes we try to turn to God, which is one form of therapy if it works. But we need to stop using our pain and our trauma as a badge of honor. It's not great. It's not strong. It's not noble to be the strong, resilient Black women who can take any kind of pain and not have to worry about, her own mental health. Mental illness is an illness. If you broke your leg, you wouldn't try to pray it away. You would go to a doctor and you would get it set, maybe surgically fixed, and you would start to heal. The same way, we need to learn to start to heal our mental states. So, how do we do that? How do we start to heal?
That's a very good question. And I have seen so many people who are, they're going through pain, trauma, and they're exposed to just suck it up. And that's kind of been our history as Black women. You're a strong Black woman. And that we're living with trauma. And one of the things that I had this conversation with a couple of women a few weeks back, we talked about it's like generations of mothers who didn't seem to have the capacity for nurturing. There was like this stoic thing where you got no affection and you got no sympathy when you cried or were hurt. And if you research, that goes all the way back to slavery, where the thought was, since you're not going to get any nurturing, I need you to be toughen up so that you don't expect it, so that you can do without it, so that you're not being babied, you're not being weak. And we're believing that if you withhold affection from a child, they'll learn not to need it. So you have all of these people for generations raised with no nurturing, and they got all these emotional traumas because they didn't receive the nurturing that you need. And they did a study a while back, I think it was on soldiers in war who suffered post-traumatic stress disorder. The ones who didn't get nurturing, the ones that didn't have good childhood memories, those were the ones who ended up with post-traumatic stress disorder when they had been through a trauma. The ones who came from a loving, nurturing background, got the kind of love, care, affection that they needed as a child, they were able to draw back on that when they had been through some horrific thing. You see your best friend's head blown off in battle. Well, they were able to recover from that if they had a foundation where there was love, there was nurturing, there was affection. So us believing that you don't need it, or if you withhold it from a child and they'll learn not to need it, that doesn't work. That just makes them more susceptible to mental illness.
I have found that the important thing is to recognize the need for trauma to be addressed, and also to recognize that one's pastor, with all of their training, may not be equipped in every area, which is why we want to send people to professionals. Now, I recognized in my own family the need for us to have family counseling because our communication skills had broken down. We came from a situation where when we moved, I intuitively knew that we were going to need some kind of therapy just to help us manage uh, interaction in a stable environment. And that needed to be created by us being able to talk out things that we had kind of suppressed and really express the fears and the pains and the expectations that we had in our lives as parents, as children. And learning how to deal with that was immensely helpful. I think because we have celebrities that laud how they have gone to a therapist and how that has helped them overcome whatever personal traumas they have, it has somehow seemed to make it okay. But Black people are thinking, this is nonsense. We can take care of this ourselves. We can work our way through it. And I will tell you that those things are that kind of thinking is extremely detrimental. And I will tell you why. My first opportunity at teaching school down here in Florida, it was a private school. I didn't realize until some time in which I had been teaching that everyone there was related to everyone else. There were brothers and sisters and half brothers and half sisters and cousins that were all in the same classroom. They were related to the principal, who was related to the kindergarten teacher, who was related to the seventh grade teacher, and who was related to the cooking staff. And really, it was like a family business. But what happened is there was such trauma because the basis of their system was based on the fact that the daughter had been killed in a gang shooting. And every year they did a march around the every month, I'm sorry, every month they did a march around the neighborhood, and they said, we know that somebody here knows what happened, no peace, no justice, and this kind of thing. But because everyone was related, they were all affected by that gang shooting. And then on the anniversary of the daughter's death, the father took his own life. And that traumatized everyone in the school because they were all related. And there were other things that came out over my time teaching there where I recognized that there was some serious mental and emotional issues that had not been dealt with because all of these people were related, but they did not go to counseling. I don't even know if counseling was extended to them. When there's like a mass shooting at a school, there is systems in place to help students be able to deal with that trauma. They have these in these schools. Some of these private minority-based schools do not avail themselves of that. I think that places in the city, place in the school system try to provide an opportunity for people to deal emotionally and mentally with different kinds of trauma that will happen in their school or in their home life. And we should not be afraid to avail ourselves of those systems. They're not out to do something bad to you or know your family business. They're trying to help you deal with issues in a place that will help you not have a mental breakdown.
I heard this said once, and I hear it many times: hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
And we keep hurting each other because we are hurt. When you see these children who are bullying, and we've talked about bullying, a lot of times those children are bullied. And so they are taking out their hurt by hurting someone else. When you see people who are violent, and understand this, understanding the problem isn't excusing it. If someone hurts me, I need justice too. But it's not on me to turn around and hurt someone else, because that doesn't take away my pain. That just passes it on and helps it to grow. And we need to stop taking so much pride in the growth of our pain. Our history didn't start with slavery. Our history here may have started with slavery. But hey, we were kings and queens across the pond. We had civilizations across the pond. We had inventions. We had languages. We had skills. We still have those things, but we also have the pain and the trauma that came from being beaten down since 1619. And until we deal with that, we can't deal with a lot of other things. When every time, and this is the thing that people always talk about, as soon as someone talks about, cops killing blacks, they start talking about black on black crime. Well, yeah, well, there's also white on white crime every time there's a mass shooting, but we don't talk about it that way. What we do need to talk about in that black on black narrative in our community is the crime that we are perpetrating against ourselves, against our family members, and against people of our community, because we are hurting, because we are hurt. We need more therapists. We need more black therapy. We need more people who can understand the trauma that we're coming from and not gaslight us into telling us, oh, I'm sure that didn't happen. We know when things happen. We knew about microaggressions and macroaggressions long before there were names for them. So we need to be able to talk about them. We need to be able to get ourselves into a safe space instead of trying to do that whole tradition of don't put your business in the streets, don't air your dirty laundry, don't you tell nobody what goes on in this house, and stop wearing our pain as if it's nothing but a participation trophy, and it's something that we don't want to participate in and we shouldn't participate in. Therapy and asking for help is a sign of strength. It is not a sign of weakness.
Yes.
And you don't want to have people feel that they are telling their business in the street. If you are going to a professional, those confessions are um,
Confidential.
they're confidential statements, and a lot of times people need to be able to recognize that there is someone that's going to help you out of this mental downward spiral where you have been traumatized over some instance that happened in your life, or some instance that happened to someone close to you, or just some experience that has so made you internalize the hurt and the pain to a point of where you are not functioning in a healthy manner. A lot of times, when they investigate some of these people, like the most recent one where an 18-year-old went and shot up a bunch of employees from a place where he used to work. And I can be real general about it because it happens so often. By the time you see this, there will probably be some other place with the same scenario. But they always say that this person had mental health issues. And for the most part, a lot of times these people do. But in dealing with mental health issues, you have to realize that certain behaviors can be observed by a professional. Sometimes it may even just be a teacher, where you have a 5-year-old coming to school with a weapon because one of his parents said that they were going to kill the others. I have experienced this. And so you recognize that sometimes trauma starts at a very early age, and if not checked at that time, it just escalates into something else that leads to something more dangerous. We have to not be afraid when they tell you if you see something, say something. We have to not be afraid to tell someone who can provide an opportunity for help.
I think knowing that, as you say, hurt people, 100% of the people who are in prison are there because of some type of mental illness. It's just not officially termed mental illness, but it is mental illness because you only have a desire to hurt someone else if you're ill, if something is hurting you. That is not a natural thing. You just, wake up and you want to strangle somebody or stab somebody. Something happened. You are in pain. And because it was not dealt with, you act out. I remember when this group, uh, Project, was it Project Orange Tree, I believe the name it was, young people who were addressing the issue of youth violence. And when Hadia Pendleton, the young lady who got killed, the honor student that everybody was all horrified, and Michelle Obama came to Chicago to her funeral. Well, everybody was focusing on these terrible boys that did it, but then the youth group that was addressing the whole issue of crime and violence and the pain that youth were in was saying, look, this is somebody who had just lost a friend to gang violence and was acting in retaliation at who he thought was a perpetrator, shooting, and of course hit Hadia. But what they said was if his grief had been handled properly, maybe the shooting would not have happened. But since young people are expected, inner city young people are expected to just suck it up. Yeah, I had my best friend die, and my brother got killed the day after that, and I'll just keep going to school like nothing happened, like they're not traumatized. And then when they react, we call them criminals. When all of this is behavior that is reacting out of emotional trauma, and we just decide to act like it's normal. And then we call people criminal when they respond to the trauma that they're experiencing. So if we would look at people differently and knowing when anybody acts out, it is not a normal behavior, it is not an emotionally well behavior, and we can get to where the problem is. We're lacking compassion as a society because we're so quick to criminalize people. And of course, you all know, we all know this, that when some mass shooter kills up a bunch of people and they happen to be white, they got a mental illness, and a black person, they happen to shoot one person, they're a criminal. What's up with that?
Yes.
So we know that there is a racial disparity when it comes to assessing when somebody's mentally ill. Everybody who does crime is mentally ill. We haven't dealt with the causes of, because we haven't dealt with a society that's ill, that creates the illness, that creates the stress. That, I mean, if somebody goes and robs a store because they need to get some money to pay their rent because they got to keep them getting put out the house, I would say that's probably, mental ill. You're trying to keep from getting evicted out into the cold and you don't have a job. I mean, there's always reasons why people do things. It's not just like, oh, they just wanted to buy a pair of $300 gym shoes. There's a whole bunch of things that go into decisions to harm somebody, but all of it is illness. And if we can address it as such, then we can respond differently instead of building up a prison business. We could really deal with the sickness in the society, the causes of the sickness, the root of the sickness, and then address the people who are responding to what's happening to them in a way that shows that they're not mentally or emotionally stable, but get them some help. And especially people who are on drugs. Yes, you're
Exactly.
taking drugs.
Exactly.
That's the pain of your mental illness, your emotional distress. So that's why you need the drugs. That's why you get hooked on the drugs. So why are we penalizing you for being in pain?
And that I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to say the same thing. Most people, when they are addicts, alcohol or any drugs, they are self-medicating. They
Yes.
are self-medicating because there is an imbalance somewhere. Maybe it's physical trauma, maybe it's mental trauma, maybe whatever it is, but they are trying to stabilize themselves in some way, to feel better, calm the nerves, calm the anxiety, calm the fears.
Yeah.
And we criminalize addiction, and we criminalize addicts instead of seeing it for what it is. It is part of the mental illness problem. And unless of course you're white, and then of course
Oh,
addiction is treated as an illness.
right, right.
And that's the thing. But we have a whole lot of us folks who are sitting in jails over weed, and maybe they were selling it, maybe they were doing it, maybe they just had a bag of it. But the thing is that we are not talking about addiction in the way it is supposed to be uh treated. We use addiction as a moral failing instead of
Yeah,
a mental illness. And
yeah.
we need to stop. If you like I said, if you broke your leg, you wouldn't try to pray it away, and you would do whatever you needed to do to fix it. And we need to fix that. We can't smoke it away or snort it away or drink it away either. So we need to do the work. And we're strong people. I'm not saying we're not strong people, but we're strong enough to do the work. And we need to just change the narrative a little bit so that we can say, this is my sign of strength. I'm going to go talk to someone, and I'm going to ask for help. And we
Go
need to get there. We need to get there. We need to encourage each other to get there.
Absolutely. There was a system in place that came out of that first mass shooting in Colorado in Columbine.
Mm,
Uh, I remember the girl's name. Her name was Rachel. She was one of the first people that was shot. And they started this program in her name to try and reach out to students who were going through the feelings of having been bullied, wanting to get retribution, and it was a program. I had tried to get it instituted when I was on the local school council staff in Chicago at my kids' high school. And it was one of those things where you started out with the students going through a session of the short seminar teachings where you listed the people that were cruel to you, what kind of things you can do to change the relationship with the people that you were having a hard time with. And over this session of these different short opportunities for kids to react, express their feelings, they found that they had changed the minds of a number of students who were either thinking of taking their own lives, taking other kids' lives. And it was a radical change to help these kids work through the mental gymnastics that lead to that downward spiral of mental illness, because a lot of these things, they start in the mind. As a man thinketh, so is he. You start out with the kind of thinking that either lowers your strengths or it's either going to build your strengths. And if you are a person who's been treated wrongly over time, that really does start to feed on you mentally. And in order to change your mind, in order to bring every thought captive, to take control, you have to first of all be trained to take control of the dead, awful thoughts that come into your mind, but also to be able to express those things in a professional setting where you can be told what is the right thing to do, what is the right thing to think, how to get yourself out of that mode where you are slowly destroying yourself. But that comes with being able to express your trauma to a professional, and for those professionals to be made available to people. There is no shame in going to therapy. Therapy has helped a lot of people overcome obstacles that might have caused them to do badly.
and there are a lot more schools that need to have therapists available, counselors available. Right now, you have too many situations. I know here in Chicago, too many situations where you have a counselor that might come in every 2 weeks or something like that, or instead of being there on staff, when you have things
All the
every
time.
day. So, and of course, they don't build a relationship with the students because they're not there often enough. You need to feel comfortable talking to somebody because these are very personal feelings. You don't just spill your guts to somebody that just because they say, "Oh, I'm a therapist." You know, adults don't do that. So we can't expect children to have that level of trust of somebody they don't know.
Right.
So
You have to build a relationship.
build a
Yeah.
relationship, and that's one of the things that we should advocate for, that there be counselors on staff all the time, not just when some tragedy happening, because there's always children who need to talk to somebody, and they need to build that relationship with the person who is there that has empathy and has the capacity to deal with the trauma that they're going through. And I've too often I've seen people who have the title, but in my opinion, my observation, they didn't have the compassion, they didn't have the empathy. They were very clinical, but definitely, in my opinion, was not somebody that I would talk to, much less expect a young person to talk to. So I think there needs to be some evaluation even of the skills of people that we advocate our children to talk to. And then of course, when you're going through therapy, you want to find somebody that you feel that you can trust. And and here in Illinois, there is some legislation that is about to be introduced that deals with mediation in situations where a child is bullied. They can demand mediation, and then you got to bring in the bully, to bring the victim of bullying, and maybe even their parents. But it's a session to address the bullying and resolve it, and have the two parties talk about it and talk about what's going on and bring it out in the open, as opposed to the adults just saying, "Oh, well, children will be children," and just letting it happen. So there's a lot of ways we have to be proactive about when we see things happening that are traumatizing. A lot of laws we can pass, and I don't know if there's a law that we can pass to say you got to get therapy if you've been through trauma. I don't know, but maybe that's something to think about. Maybe there's a way to legislate it so that it will be something required, especially if a person's got a high stress job, like say a police officer. If you've just witnessed
Or
something
the post office.
on the street until you get therapy.
Yes, but
I'm
um,
saying, or the post office.
I
Postal,
don't.
yeah, how many people go
Yes.
on postal?
Well, I don't know if I'd want to necessarily see that legislated, but I want it to be made available more easily through insurance, Medicare for all, y'all, um, and other avenues, so that it's not onerous as far as payment. Because if you have to think, okay, do I go to therapy or do I eat? You
Right.
ain't going to therapy.
Ain't going
And
to
that's the thing, is that we make, because so many things are so expensive for our community, we don't not it's not that we don't want to avail ourselves of it. Sometimes we just can't afford it.
And like you
And
say, people, they go to their pastor. Okay, there's a point where you need a person who understands how to counsel, and not everybody who is religious has that skill. That's a learned skill. But I would say maybe what churches can do is find out who in their congregation has those skills. They might have some people have them in a position where they can't offer counseling. Get a real counselor. Don't just say, "Well, I'm gonna go talk to my pastor and then he can quote the Bible to you." And that's not helpful if they're not understanding how to deal with your pain. That's a training. That's a whole separate training that needs to be had. And religious people don't have that kind of training. I don't care what religion is. You have not had that training. You might have
and
learned.
Unless you've
and
actually
prayer
had that training.
and
And just like
prayer
marriage counseling,
Right.
I know
That's
this is just
training
a show that I saw on This Is Us, but don't think that, oh, you go to a therapist, things don't work out. Okay, therapy doesn't work. You need to find a therapist that is going to be appropriate and workable with you. I know that the lead in This Is Us, I can't think of his name right now. I totally am
Sterling K. Brown.
Yes, he, he was going to a therapist and realized that she really could not identify with him in the way he needed to be identified, and he ended up going to a Black male therapist who could totally relate to the kind of trauma that he experienced, the kind of fears that he experienced, and not downplay and really help him to open up and share those things.
Right.
Because he felt ashamed or embarrassed to share these things with his first therapist because he knew innately she would not be able to relate.
Right.
So it's all about being able to find someone who can relate to you, but also not be demeaning to you. There's nothing worse than going to somebody who has one of these attitudes that is completely unloving and not good.
Yeah.
Not
And in
good.
that sense, and in that sense also, like a lot of times, we three are religious in our own way, and prayer is great, but it's the beginning of a conversation, and
Right.
it's usually a conversation with God. And if you go to a pastor and he says, "Well, we'll pray about this," well, yeah, that's wonderful. And now what do I do? Because that's the beginning. That can't be the end all and be all. There has to be more to it. And if you're like me, United Methodist, where they change pastors every 3 years or less, you don't even build up that camaraderie or that relationship where you feel, comfortable going to somebody because you just met them or they're on their way out the door.
Hey, they don't.
So
Yeah. And
so we need to advocate for each other. We
absolutely.
need to advocate for each other and say it's okay to be scared, to be traumatized, to be anxious, you know, and to need help.
Right. And urge our friends to get help, and don't shame anyone who feels like they need to go and talk to a professional, because that's why they're there. So, well, we've got to go. And we thank you all for being with us. Make sure you contact us on Twitter and Instagram and our blogs. And we look forward to talking to you next time. I'm Naima.
I'm Cheryl.
I'm Barbara. We're three Black moms.
Bye.
Bye.